Have you ever wondered, where upon this vast earth did humankind first learn to build a world of its own? Not with iron, steel, or cement, but with earth, water, and an undying thirst for eternity. Amid the boundless plains between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers, thousands of years before the pyramids of Egypt rose, a civilization emerged, quietly, steadfastly, as profound as the first breath of humankind. It was there that people learned to write memory into clay, to raise cities from dust, to measure the passing of time, and to give names to the stars. From the mud of Mesopotamia, they shaped laws, temples, and the earliest dreams of immortality. Tonight, let this story carry you across 12,000 years of history, back to the cradle of all human journeys, to the place where gods walked among men, where power was born from the laboring hand, and where the darkness of humanity's first night was kindled by knowledge. Now, gently close your eyes, release your body, quiet your mind. Let each breath drift softly, like wind over the desert, and let the story of the world's oldest civilization whisper to you about ourselves, about when mankind first learned to become human. As night descends upon Mesopotamia, the desert wind sweeps through the cracked ruins of Uruk and Eridu. In the murmur of shifting sands, one can still hear an echo, the call of human origin. Before there were cities, before writing or laws, this land was but a barren stretch split by two rivers, the Tigris and the Euphrates. Yet here, amid the hardship of earth and water, humankind began its greatest journey, the journey from instinct to awareness, from survival to creation. Around 12,000 years before Christ, the earth was leaving its ice age. The glaciers melted, rivers carved new paths, and the land between them turned fertile beyond imagination. For the first time, the wandering hunters and gatherers, nomads chasing seasons, paused. They discovered that when the rivers overflowed, the soil grew soft and rich, and when the floods withdrew, black fields were born, sprouting wild wheat and barley, the first grains of human sustenance. In the crimson dawn over Mesopotamia, humankind learned a simple yet revolutionary truth. To cultivate is to prolong life through intelligence. They began to choose seeds, to remember winds and seasons, to study the moods of water. From this wisdom, they learned to tame wheat and barley, to sow and to wait, a seemingly simple act that changed the destiny of mankind. Along the banks of the Tigris, huts made of reeds arose, the first settlements. There, humanity discovered the meaning of to stay, to plant, to harvest, to store. And when food exceeded a family's needs, they began to share, to trade, to preserve. In that instant, when humankind prepared for the future, they crossed the threshold of nature and became creators. Archaeological traces tell us that settlements like Tel Es-Awan and Chogamami formed around the 8th millennium BCE. Houses of sun-dried mud brick, walls built by bare hands, yet within them lay the seeds of an organized society. They learned division of labor, farmers, hunters, cooks, keepers of grain. From small plots, they carved the first irrigation channels with bone and wood, guiding river water to feed the earth. Each flood taught new lessons. When waters rose, they built embankments. When the ground cracked, they dug canals. When granaries filled, they appointed a keeper, someone who stood for the community, holding both power and duty. Thus was born the first idea of leadership, and with it, the first hint of law. For when people live together, they need boundaries between mine and yours. They need promises, oaths, and faith. Those early understandings, unwritten yet sacred, became the foundations of social order. At night, when fires flickered along the riverside, elders told children stories of holy waters, of the unseen spirit sleeping beneath the river, of the flood as divine wrath and the harvest as blessing. From such faith, the first seeds of religion began to grow. Humanity started to believe in powers greater than itself, forces that ruled over rain, thunder, and fertility, and that through offering, gratitude, and obedience, they might earn favor. Faith was born not from fear, but from reverence, from the longing to live in harmony with the universe. And from that faith, humanity learned to remember. Before writing, memory flowed through stories, through the beat of drums, through symbols carved on stone. On damp clay tablets, they drew simple signs, a grain of wheat, an ox, a river. These were not yet letters, but they were the first voice of human intellect. As communities grew, people learned to cooperate. A single field could not be irrigated by one person alone. A dike could not be raised by a pair of hands. To make these things work, they needed coordination, leaders, time, schedules, all early steps toward organized society. By 7000 BCE, the first villages had structure, living quarters, storehouses, workshops, and a central open space, the community heart. There they gathered to discuss the seasons, divide produce, and hold rituals together. That unity, though humble, turned a group of people into a community, and a community into a society. With time, they began to understand they were not merely living off the land, they were living with it. They observed the night sky, tracked the moon's phases, recognized the rhythm of rains and droughts, the order of nature itself. Each observation became a lesson, each lesson a step toward awareness. Gradually, they did more than adapt. They learned to control their surroundings. That mastery of water, crops, and storage was the true dawn of civilization. For civilization does not begin with luxury, but with the ability to foresee and shape the future. Archaeologists have found within Mesopotamian sediment traces of wheat pollen, kiln remains, and shards of primitive pottery. Evidence of the first science, observation, experimentation, and transmission. There were no schools, yet there was tradition. No books, yet there was collective memory. And as they watched the rivers shift their course, they realized that time itself flowed like water, unceasing, irreversible. It was the moment humanity became conscious of time. As one historian wrote, civilization begins where chaos ends. In Mesopotamia, chaos was conquered not by weapons, but by wisdom, the wisdom of those who looked into nature and discerned its law. From this land were born the concepts of organization, rules, and function. No longer mere hunters surviving on luck, they became masters of harvest, keepers of rivers, builders of embankments, the first engineers of humankind. By around 6000 BCE, the first light of civilization shone over Mesopotamia. Riverside villages connected into networks of trade. Pottery was hardened by fire, its patterns growing ever more intricate, a testament to skilled hands and vivid imagination. Fields of barley rippled like seas of gold. Flocks of sheep, goats, and cattle grazed under human care. Humanity no longer feared nature. They conversed with it. They built homes of brick, roofed them with reeds, forged tools of polished stone, bone, and crude bronze. The kilns burned bright, and in that glow, humankind beheld its own reflection, the second creator. Thus, from soil and water, from seasons and rivers, from hand and mind, humanity built what we now call society. No empire, no kings, no wars, only faith that life could be better and that knowledge could endure across generations. Tonight, if you listen closely, amid the whispering sands, you may still hear the gentle tapping of ancient hands shaping bricks, the murmuring water of the first canals, and the distant songs of Mesopotamian farmers, those who turned wasteland into home and sowed the first seeds of civilization for all humankind. As the last fires dimmed along the ancient banks of the Tigris and Euphrates, humanity crossed a new threshold of existence. From patient farmers cultivating wheat and barley, they had gathered enough wisdom, sustenance, and faith to begin a new age. From the seed of village life sprouted the first cities, and in the southern plains of Mesopotamia, on lands rich with silt and sunlight, those seeds grew into the first centers of civilization: Eridu, Ur, Lagash, and Uruk. Around 4000 BCE, the Sumerian plain bloomed like a living miracle amid the desert. The Euphrates flowed, carrying fertile silt. The fiercer Tigris brought challenge. Between them, humankind learned to tame water, as if taming its own fate. Canals linked fields to rivers, dikes restrained floods, and man-made reservoirs captured the rain, all not merely feats of engineering, but revelations of awakening intelligence. For when humanity learned to control nature, it also learned to govern itself. From small villages rose greater settlements. Farmers became traders. Pottery, grain, wool, metals, and gemstones acquired worth in the earliest marketplaces. And as goods flowed, so too did trust, the invisible thread weaving together economy, faith, and power. Amid this awakening world, Uruk, the brightest jewel of Sumer, began to rise. Lying beside the Euphrates, where river meets desert, Uruk stood as humanity's first true city. From afar, it appeared an island of order amid the chaos of sand. Rows of mud brick houses stood close together. A clay-paved road led straight to the heart of the city, where the grand terraces of the White Temple of Iana soared, the sanctuary of Inanna, goddess of love and war. That temple was more than a symbol of faith. It was the heart of the city. There, offerings were made, prayers uttered for gentle rains, yet there too were records kept, food distributed, land measured. Religion and administration became one, forming humanity's first model of governance. The leaders of these cities were not merely priests. They were the earthly representatives of the gods, called Ensi. the first theocratic rulers of humankind. Uruk grew beyond every boundary humanity had ever known. Its population swelled to more than 50,000, a number unprecedented in the ancient world. Farmers brought their wheat, craftsmen shaped clay and bronze. Merchants steered boats laden with goods down the Euphrates. Thousands of hands, tens of thousands of minds, all moved within a single vast mechanism, not powered by iron or gears, but by faith and law. Yet as the city expanded, memory, by word of mouth, was no longer enough. The keepers of grain had to recall the stores, the herds, the goods. And so, upon wet clay tablets, humans began to carve signs, first the shape of a grain, a sheep, or a jar of wine. From those symbols, a miracle was born, the first writing of humankind. At first, it was mere accounting, marks of trade and measure, but over time it evolved into the language of intellect. The wedge-shaped strokes, cuneiform, became standardized. Each mark bore a meaning, and each combination a thought. For the first time, humanity wrote its own world. They recorded harvests, trade, and prayers to the gods. From the clay tablet, mankind stepped into history, an era where memory no longer faded in stories, but endured in eternal inscription. Writing was the greatest invention of mankind, for it made memory eternal. No one knows who first said those words, yet they ring true. For once writing was born, humanity no longer feared forgetting. The city-state of Uruk was not only home to writing, it was home to order. As wealth accumulated, society divided into classes: farmers, artisans, merchants, priests, and kings. Those who dwelled nearest the temples were deemed closer to the gods, and thus more powerful. The world became stratified, yet also dynamic. For every layer, low or high, sustained the vast circle of existence, the first social machine. At its center, religion was the thread that bound them all. The Sumerians did not see their gods, yet they believed that every rain, every wind, every harvest was the breath of divine presence. Each city-state worshipped its own patron deity. Eridu honored Enki, god of water and wisdom. Nippur revered Enlil, god of wind and authority. Ur bowed to Nana, god of the moon, and Uruk, the heart of civilization, worshipped Inanna, the goddess of love and war, who bestowed both creation and destruction. The massive tiered towers, ziggurats, were built to shorten the distance between mortals and gods. From the earth, humanity began its ascent toward heaven. During this age, Uruk was not alone. Across Mesopotamia, other city-states rose: Eridu, Lagash, Kish, and Ur, each a small universe with its own laws, gods, and armies. Among them flowed trade, diplomacy, and inevitably, war. Yet even in conflict, they shared a single inheritance, a common language, a shared faith, and a dream of eternal order. In the blazing noon light upon the Enna temple walls, Sumerians carved the first words about themselves, not as nameless farmers, but as citizens of a city. It was a monumental transformation, from village to urban life, from natural existence to crafted civilization. Uruk was more than a city, it was an idea, a symbol of how humankind organizes the world. Here they invented the first systems of governance: citizen councils, priest kings, taxation, and record-keeping. Everything followed the cycles of rivers, seasons, and faith. For the Sumerians believed every grain of sand, every drop of water, belonged to divine order. At night, moonlight gleamed upon the steps of the ziggurat, glinting off cuneiform lines etched deep into clay, the earliest records of human memory. And in that moment, mankind realized it had created something greater than itself, a system, a city, a world. Beneath layers of earth and ash, thousands of years later, archaeologists unearthed those clay tablets. On them, faint but deliberate strokes remained, lists of goods, quantities, the names of gods, and pleas of devotion. One of the oldest inscriptions reads, "For Inanna, may the temple be pure." A simple prayer, yet a declaration that here, knowledge had become a path to the sacred. From the world of villages, humanity had entered the age of cities, writing, and governance. The story of Uruk and Sumer is not merely the history of a people, it is the prologue to civilization itself. For once humankind learned to write, to worship, to organize, and to build, everything that followed, empires, religions, science, philosophy, sprang from this source. And when night falls and the wind sighs through the broken ziggurats, the whisper of ancient bricks still echoes through the dark. We, the Sumerians, were the first to remember. As the sound of mallets striking clay echoed from Uruk across the Mesopotamian plain, humankind learned to preserve memory, to measure harvests, and to recite its own name. Yet with writing and cities, something else was born. Power. And when power merged with faith, a new order arose. The order of gods and those chosen by them. After the rise of cities, the Sumerian world became a constellation of small universes, each with its own gods, laws, and soul. Eridu belonged to Enki, lord of water and wisdom, who brought life from the abyss to the earth. Nippur to Enlil, god of the wind, the sovereign of command. Ur to Nana, the moon god who illuminated the endless night, and Uruk, the burning heart of Sumer, to Inanna, goddess of love and war, who embodied both grace and destruction. From faith in these gods, humans built a world where every act and every decision bore divine weight. This was the age when the great ziggurats began to rise, not merely as monuments of architecture, but as bridges between heaven and earth. The lowest tier belonged to mortals, labor, offerings, daily life. The middle tier to priests, the intermediaries between man and God. And at the summit, closest to the heavens, stood the throne of divinity itself. Every brick placed in the ziggurat was a prayer, every act of labor an offering of faith. The Sumerians believed the gods dwelt above, and only by rising upward could humankind be worthy of being heard. Thus each city became a living temple, where religion, economy, and politics were one and the same. Within these colossal ziggurats were not only incense and altars, but ledgers, storehouses, and accounting rooms. Priests recorded every grain of barley, every sheep, every jar of wine offered to the gods. They managed labor, oversaw trade, and administered resources, all in the name of divinity. From this, the first administrative systems of humanity were born. A temple in Uruk could command thousands of workers, men digging canals, women weaving cloth, potters shaping clay, merchants bearing goods across the land. All worked for the gods, and through them, for the cosmic order itself. The Sumerians believed that if the gods were pleased, the fields would flourish, the rivers would calm, and the cities would prosper. But if the gods grew angry, floods, droughts, and war would descend. Human existence was thus wholly bound to divine will. And yet, a question began to stir within the hearts of rulers. If the gods could not govern the world directly, who would rule in their stead? The answer came through faith, etched in every brick of the ziggurat. The king is chosen by the gods. Thus was born the idea of divine kingship, the first theocracy in human history. From that moment, the leader was no longer merely an ensi, the high priest, but became the Lugal, the Great One, the King. He was both ruler and intermediary between heaven and earth. Every decree he spoke carried the voice of the gods, and loyalty to him became an act of devotion. The Sumerian world entered a radiant age of order and invention. Within its city-states arose some of humanity's most enduring creations. The wheel, which carried goods beyond the limits of villages. The sailboat, which spread commerce along the rivers. The plow drawn by oxen, which turned nature's strength into productivity. And the sexagesimal system, the base 60 mathematics, that still shapes how we measure time and the heavens today. The Sumerians looked to the sky, dividing the circle into 360 degrees, counting 60 seconds to a minute, 60 minutes to an hour. From them, time itself became measurable, a triumph of abstraction and intellect. Every number, every wheel that turned, every sail that caught the wind upon the Euphrates was proof that religion and science were never enemies. They coexisted, born from the same conviction that the universe moves according to sacred order. On the clay tablets, the Sumerians wrote, "The gods created mankind to carry the burden of the world. Human beings were born to uphold the order of existence, not to break it. Thus, every act, from cultivation and construction to war, was part of a sacred duty. Each morning, as the sun rose over the walls of Ur, priests lit incense before the statue of Inanna. The king offered sacrifices, and the people knelt at the foot of the ziggurat. None dared raise their eyes to the gods, yet all felt the radiance descending from the temple's summit. A reminder that all power upon the earth flows from the heavens above. In this same era, the Sumerians built monuments unlike anything the world had seen. Vast city walls rose around Uruk, Ur, and Lagash, meant both for defense and as symbols of divine authority. Behind those walls stood palaces and treasuries filled with gold, pearls, and goods from distant lands. Sumerian merchants journeyed far, to India, Persia, and Anatolia, trading goods, returning with metals, rare woods, and the deep blue lapis lazuli. The first trade routes in human history were drawn upon the map, a network woven by the hands of gods. But beyond prosperity, Sumer attained a higher form of wisdom, the knowledge of self. The wedge-shaped inscriptions on clay no longer recorded only harvests. They began to ask greater questions. Who are we in the eyes of the gods? Why do we serve them? And can there be justice in a world decreed by divinity? From these contemplations arose the dawn of philosophy and ethics. Texts such as the Instructions of Shuruppak taught humans to live with honesty, to keep their word, to honor their parents and their gods. One line reads, "Do not speak arrogantly to your mother, or your God will punish you." Not as a threat, but as a reminder, harmony with divine order is the foundation of happiness. And so, from earth and water, from gods and men, Sumer built a kingdom of sacred order. Every brick, every symbol, every prayer bore one purpose: to preserve balance between heaven and earth. On moonlit nights, when wind swept across the ziggurats' peak, the moonlight gleamed on its walls like the writing of the gods themselves. The Sumerians gazed upward, believing the deities watched them, silent, stern, yet full of mercy. In the sleep of Mesopotamia, the Euphrates still flowed like the breath of the world, and within each ripple whispered the prayer of humanity's first children. We built our cities for the gods, and in serving them, we learned to become human. From that devotion, Sumer entered a radiant age, where religion, power, and knowledge merged into one, forming the foundation upon which all later empires would stand. And when night cloaked the ancient ziggurat steps, the wind carried the same eternal whisper, that here, beneath the light of the gods, humankind had discovered its first true order. As the dawn of Sumer still blazed upon its towering ziggurats, when humankind believed power flowed from the gods and order was unshakable. To the north of the Great Plain, a new figure emerged, a man not born from temples, not chosen by prophecy, yet driven by a dream to touch eternity through the strength of will. His name was Sargon of Akkad, the man who would write the next chapter of civilization, the story of the world's first empire. Legend says Sargon was not of royal blood, but a nameless child set adrift upon a river, like so many ancient heroes whose fates began in abandonment. It is said his mother was a priestess who could not keep him, so she placed the infant in a basket of reeds and let the river carry him away. My mother, a high priestess, conceived me, gave birth to me in secret. She placed me in a basket of reeds and set me upon the river. From the legend of Sargon, one of humanity's oldest autobiographical texts, fate carried the child to Kish, where a gardener found and raised him. He grew in the shadow of the great city walls, but within the boy of Akkad burned something different, a refusal to remain ordinary. He saw the Sumerian kings kneel before idols, the priests rule nations through ritual, and he understood a new order must rise, an order not born of temples, but forged by the hands of men. When opportunity came, Sargon seized it. He led a rebellion, overthrew King Ur-Nammu of Kish, and marched south, challenging the ancient Sumerian world. For the first time, the scattered city-states, divided for millennia, faced a unified force, disciplined, strategic, bound by loyalty to one man. Sargon was not the first king to command an army, but he was the first to turn an army into an institution. Under his command, farmers with hoes became soldiers with spears. The Akkadian army was the first professional force, equipped with composite bows, leather armor, and two-wheeled chariots, the most advanced weapons of their age. They besieged cities with engineering precision, deploying battering towers, slings, and siege ramps, tactics the ancient world had never seen. In ancient inscriptions, he is praised as King of the Four Quarters of the World. through might and ruthlessness, he conquered Uruk, Ur, Lagash, Umma, and all Sumerian cities, then marched farther to Syria, Anatolia, and Elam in the east. For the first time in history, a unified empire arose, stretching from the Persian Gulf to the Mediterranean Sea. Sargon built his capital, Akkad, a legendary city yet to be found. It was said to stand between the Tigris and Euphrates, encircled by white walls and streets paved with lapis lazuli. From there, he ruled the all Mesopotamia with a single language, law, and administration. For the first time, the concept of a centralized state was born. He appointed governors, imposed taxes and military service, and forged a vast trade network across the land. Clay tablets from the Akkadian era record booming commerce. Goods flowing from Oman, Persia, and Syria, all managed through standardized cuneiform, now the official administrative script. In his court, scholars and priests from Sumer and Akkad merged their knowledge, laying the foundation for humanity's first cultural synthesis. The Sumerian gods were adopted and transformed. Anu, Enlil, and Inanna became An, Enlil, and Ishtar, a union of faith and empire, myth and power. But Sargon was more than a conqueror or ruler. He became a symbol of eternity. In stone reliefs, he is depicted with a distant gaze, a bronze helmet, a curled beard, and armor gleaming like fire. Standing upon the battlefield as though a god incarnate, he proclaimed that the gods themselves had chosen him to restore order to the world, that his rule was destiny. The great gods made me king. I ruled the lands under their watchful eyes. Under his reign, Akkad became both a state and a myth, the radiant heart of the ancient world. When Sargon died, his people deified him, worshipping him as one who had ascended among the gods. Yet power did not fade. It reached its zenith under his grandson, Naram-Sin. Naram-Sin embodied boundless ambition. Unsatisfied with the title king of the four quarters, he declared himself god of Akkad, donning the horned crown reserved only for the divine. In the famous victory stele of Naram-Sin, he is carved as a triumphant god, ascending a mountain above fallen foes, while the stars, symbols of the divine, shine upon him. No boundary remained between man and God. In the glow of conquest, the king became divine, and the empire became legend. Yet at the height of power, the cracks of destiny began to show. The empire of Akkad was vast, diverse, and perilously dependent on one man's strength. Rebellions erupted in conquered lands. Generals turned traitor. The soil itself withered after years of war. Drought struck, the Euphrates shifted its course, harvests failed. Nature itself seemed to turn against the empire. The Akkadians believed the gods had grown wrathful. The tablet. The curse of Akkad records. Lil changed the destiny of Akkad. The city was smitten by hunger, its people by despair. They said Enlil, the god of wind, the ultimate sovereign, had forsaken Akkad, casting it into ruin. From the Zagros mountains, the Gutian tribes descended, wild nomads without writing, without temples, knowing only conquest and plunder. The mighty empire of Sargon and Naram-Sin fell within mere decades. Akkad was burned, its capital vanished from the earth, and the once glorious power dissolved into dust. The generations that came after did not see only a fallen empire. They saw an eternal lesson, that all power, even the divine, is fleeting when it forgets its source, mankind and the Mother Earth. For the gods may grant, but they may also reclaim all that has been given. Tonight, as the wind sweeps across the desolate plain that was once Akkad, there is no trace of the legendary capital, only the silent current of the Tigris gliding beneath the silver moon. Yet if one listens closely, the echoes still linger. The march of soldiers' feet, the rumble of wooden wheels over earth, and the proud voice of the first king in human history. I am Sargon, king of Akkad, the first to unite the lands of the world. Once again, humankind learned that power may conquer everything except time. And in the still night of Mesopotamia, the first empire lives on, not in stone or sword, but in the memory of humanity's dream to unite the world through intellect and will. When the empire of Akkad crumbled beneath the sandstorms of the Gutians, Mesopotamia descended into a long age of chaos. City-states dissolved, trade collapsed, and the rivers that once carried silt now churned with mud and blood. People called it the Dark Age, a time when prayers went unanswered and the drums of war drowned the music of knowledge. Yet as every dawn follows night, from the ashes of Akkad, Sumer rose again. From the southern plains came a new king, Ur-Nammu, founder of the third dynasty of Ur. He came not with thunder and conquest, but with a vision of order and justice. Ur-Nammu ascended the throne around 2112 BCE, amidst the ruins of Sumerian civilization. The city-states lay divided, the people starved, the gods forgotten, and in that chaos, he understood what humanity truly needed was not another sword, but a law, a shared order in which men could once more trust each other. Ur-Nammu was not merely a warrior, he was an architect of justice. He composed the first written code of laws in human history, the Code of Ur-Nammu. Upon clay tablets, he inscribed a principle no one had dared to carve in stone before. That law, not divine will, shall be the measure of justice. One surviving line reads, I did not deliver the orphan to the rich, nor the widow to the mighty. These were not just the words of a king. They were the first declaration of human morality in governance. At the same time, Ur-Nammu built the great ziggurat of Ur, the grandest stepped temple of the ancient world, made of millions of sun-baked bricks. The temple honored Nana, the moon god, but more than that, it symbolized a new order, a society where gods and men were bound not by fear, but by law. At its foot, the people of Ur gathered again. Merchants trading, scholars recording, farmers returning to their fields. Once more, Mesopotamia breathed, the breath of rebirth. After Ur-Nammu came his son, Shulgi, one of the greatest rulers of the ancient world. If Ur-Nammu laid the foundation, Shulgi built the temple of knowledge upon it. He ruled for more than 40 years, and under his reign Sumer reached the zenith of culture and administration. He expanded the bureaucracy, unified the tax system, and established centers of learning, the first prototypes of schools. Ancient texts describe Shulgi as a king who could read, write, and compose, who understood music, mathematics, and poetry. He decreed that every official must be literate, and that knowledge was the tool of power. In Ur, scribes compiled some of humanity's greatest texts. Carefully pressed into clay with the cuneiform stylus, they recorded myths, epics, and philosophies. It was in this era that the Epic of Gilgamesh was completed, the work we now call the first masterpiece of world literature. In the long night of history, the Sumerians wrote immortal words about life, death, and the human longing for eternity. But as with all kingdoms before it, the light of Earth the Three began to fade. Prosperity bred luxury, bureaucracy grew heavy, and endless wars with neighboring tribes weakened the realm. From the west came the Amorites, nomads from the Syrian desert, bringing not the gods of Sumer, but the fierce vitality of a people unbound by tradition. When Ur fell, Mesopotamia once again changed hands. Yet from its ruins, a new flame rose in the north. Babylon. At first, Babylon was but a modest river city, but under the hand of Hammurabi, it became the center of the ancient world. Hammurabi was not merely a strategist. He was a lawgiver, a philosopher, and the heir to Ur-Nammu's vision. When he ascended the throne around 1792 BCE, Mesopotamia was once more divided among many small kingdoms. Hammurabi began with diplomacy and alliances, then conquered one by one through a blend of wit and strength. After 30 years of campaigns, he unified the entire land between the rivers, from Mari in the north to Larsa in the south. Once more, Mesopotamia became an empire. But what made Hammurabi immortal was not conquest, it was law. He issued the Code of Hammurabi, a collection of 282 laws, carved into a black diorite stele over 2 meters tall, still preserved today in the Louvre Museum. At its summit, the king is depicted standing before Shamash, the sun god of justice, receiving the scepter and ring of authority. That stele was not just a political artifact, it was an eternal proclamation of humanity's commitment to justice and order. One passage reads, "To bring about the rule of righteousness in the land, to destroy the wicked and the evildoers, so that the strong might not oppress the weak." Those were the words of a king, but also the oath of humankind, a vow that henceforth people would live not by the will of gods or kings, but by the laws they made for themselves. During this era, Babylon became the heart of science and knowledge. The Babylonians expanded Sumer's base 60 mathematics, enabling them to calculate area, volume, and time with astonishing precision. They divided the circle into 360 degrees, created multiplication tables, and recorded daily astronomical observations, laying the foundations of modern astronomy. Clay tablets from Sippar and Ur reveal lists of planetary positions, predictions of eclipses, and lunar cycles. Babylonian intellect, like their temples, reached upward, not to pray, but to understand and measure the cosmos. Their architecture, too, reached divine heights. Gates of blue stone, walls inlaid with glazed bricks and gold, temples that pierced the heavens, all reflected humanity's yearning to reach the divine through its own hands. It is said that from this ambition was born the legend of the Tower of Babel, a tower that sought to touch the sky, a symbol of mankind's pride, but also a warning of its limits before the cosmic order. Looking back, from Ur-Nammu to Hammurabi, humanity had journeyed through rebirth and enlightenment. From the darkness of collapse, men rebuilt law, rediscovered justice, and carved into stone their prayers for generations unborn. If Sargon had unified the world through strength, Ur-Nammu and Hammurabi united humanity through reason. If the ziggurat of Ur symbolized the ascent toward the gods, then Hammurabi's stele embodied the triumph of human intellect. And as night falls upon the ancient ruins, the desert wind sighs through the cuneiform stones, its echo still carrying the timeless creed, "The strong shall not oppress the weak." In that oath, humankind found a civilization of reason, where justice was no longer a gift of the gods, but the creation of man. When the light of Babylon dimmed after Hammurabi's age, Mesopotamia once again turned upon its endless wheel of change. Dynasties rose and fell, yet the Euphrates and Tigris still flowed, bearing silt and the secrets of time. To the south, the fields of Ur had crumbled into dust. To the north, amid the cold mountains and dry winds, a new people were rising. Men not born to sing of peace, but to write history in iron, blood, and absolute order. They called themselves the Assyrians. Assyria did not rise from nothing. For centuries, it was merely a small kingdom along the banks of the Tigris River, centered around the city of Ashur, named for its god, the same divine patron of war and justice, bearer of the sacred spear that guarded the order of the world. From the name of their god, they named their land. From faith in that god, they forged the iron will of a warrior nation. The Assyrians were born between mountain and desert, between cold and scarcity. Harsh nature taught them one truth: only strength could preserve life. They became soldiers, hard, disciplined, and merciless, a people history remembers as the first warriors of the world. When iron began to replace bronze, the Assyrians were the first to forge it into weapons. The iron sword was not merely stronger, it was symbolic. Humankind had learned to draw power from the bones of the earth itself, to command fate. With iron armor, bronze helmets, composite bows, and chariots swift as thunder, the Assyrian army became a machine of conquest. Yet their true power lay not only in weapons, but in organization. For the first time in history, humankind created a professional army, divided into units, trained year-round. With logistics, command, and intelligence systems, the Assyrians understood that victory did not spring from courage alone, but from discipline and strategy. They built networks of roads connecting cities, forming a system of communication and transport. The early foundation of what we now call an administrative empire. By around 900 BCE, Assyria began an age of relentless expansion. Under Tiglath-Pileser III, they reformed their government, reorganized the army, created a centralized bureaucracy, and laid the foundation for the greatest empire of its time. Every conquered land paid tribute in goods and people. Every rebellious city was leveled, its inhabitants exiled to distant lands, both punishment and control. The Assyrians ruled not only with the sword, but with fear as a tool of governance. In palace reliefs, they carved scenes of kings on horseback amid corpses, soldiers parading with severed heads, and captives kneeling at their feet. It was more than propaganda. It was a manifesto of power, a declaration that order exists only when all submit to the will of Ashur and his king. Under Sennacherib, Assyria reached its most dazzling and most terrible height. He built his capital at Nineveh, beside the Tigris, a city of unmatched splendor in the ancient East. Encircled by walls more than 12 kilometers long and nearly 30 meters high, Nineveh was filled with palaces, gardens, and radiant temples. Upon its walls Sennacherib inscribed, "I am Sennacherib, the great king, the king of the world, the king of Assyria." He saw himself as the heir of the gods, the living embodiment of cosmic order. Under his reign, the Assyrian Empire stretched from the Mediterranean Sea to Persia, from Armenia to the borders of Egypt, the largest empire humanity had yet seen. But amid the roar of conquest, the Assyrians still carried within them a passion for knowledge. Sennacherib and his successor Ashurbanipal were not merely warriors, they were guardians of memory. Ashurbanipal, the last great king of Assyria, was a true scholar. He could read and write cuneiform, and he gathered from every corner the ancient writings of Sumer, Akkad, and Babylon. In Nineveh, he built the world's first library, the Library of Ashurbanipal, holding more than 30,000 clay tablets covering every field: religion, medicine, astronomy, mathematics, and literature. Among them lay the most complete copy of the Epic of Gilgamesh. On one tablet he wrote, "I, Ashurbanipal, king of the world, learned the art of the scribe and read the words of the wise of old." These were the words of a king, but also the proclamation of wisdom. He understood that true power lies not in the sword, but in the memory of humankind. Through his library, he preserved the legacy of all civilizations before him. Sumer, Akkad, Babylon, etched forever into clay, so that no one could erase them. But as with all things under heaven, every empire must fall. When strength expands beyond its limits, it becomes its own burden. Rebellions broke out across conquered lands. The people's hatred grew. Endless wars drained the empire's lifeblood. In 612 BCE, a coalition of Babylon and Media laid siege to Nineveh. The city burned, the empire collapsed, and the palaces of Assyria turned to ash. Those who once believed they were chosen by the gods to uphold order now became victims of the very destiny they had served. Yet, what they left behind did not vanish. It flowed through the veins of history. In the language of scholars, in the structure of empires, in the codes of law and the blueprints of architecture, in the enduring idea that power must be organized and knowledge must be preserved. As the last armies faded into the twilight of Mesopotamia, the red bricks of Nineveh still smoldered. Beneath layers of ash, the tablets of Ashurbanipal lay silently waiting to be read, and thousands of years later, when archaeologists unearthed them, humanity once again heard the voices of its ancestors, the first who knew how to remember, to fight, and to reflect upon the meaning of power. From Sumer to Assyria, from clay to iron, from divinity to knowledge, humankind had completed a circle of spiritual evolution. They had learned to plant, to write, to build, to conquer, and finally, to remember themselves. In the stillness of the desert night, if you listen closely, you may hear the wind whisper across the ancient ruins, carrying the eternal voice of Mesopotamia. We built cities, we made laws, We sought the gods, and in doing so, we became human. And so, from the mud of Mesopotamia, humankind gave birth to its first cities, laws, and memory. The story ends not with the sound of war drums or songs of victory, but with the sacred silence of wisdom, where all empires turn to dust, and only one thing endures: the human will to understand and remember itself forever.